So good to see you all. Well, I'm honored with the chance to introduce Professor Vamik Volkan. So, well, it's an honor, but how to introduce a man whose name is heard in high places? He knew and knows them all, the Clintons, Henry Kissinger, the Gorbachevs, Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser Arafat, Anwar al-Sadat, and. To introduce a man who was 5 times nominated for the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, to be exact. A man who has written and edited more than 70 books. I couldn't really count them exactly, and endless numbers of articles. A man who developed the concept of large group identity, and connected to that, chosen trauma, chosen glory, and time collapse. Concepts that are very much referred to and needed nowadays in our war-torn world. So to introduce you, Vamik, is nearly an impossible task. So let's start it. Let's try. The occasion for my contribution today is a Lifetime Award for Professor Volkan. So let's have a look at this life. What a life. It's nearly 92 years now. When he was born, the British Empire was still in full power. The US were rising to being the next big power. The colonial system was still nearly untouched. Nazi power and following World War II were still to come. Born to Cypriot Turkish parents in the then British colony of Cyprus, sorry, I lost my, he was born to Cypriot Turkish parents in the then British colony of Cyprus. At that time, Greek, Turks, and Armenians lived door by door together, though everybody knew exactly about their own affiliations and aspirations. As a young man, he went to Turkey to study medicine, continuing his studies and career later in the US. He comments on that background with the sentence, "My being born in Cyprus served as a living laboratory for my involvement in large group conflicts and my work on large group psychology in its own rights." So that was the starting point in a certain way. And I might add that the cultural differences between Cyprus, Turkey, and then the US probably will have added to this disposition. Professor Volkan is known for his work on large group psychology, pleading its place as a psychology in its own right. That means social conflicts cannot be reduced to the psychology of political leaders, nor can they be explained by the dynamics of small groups. Building on Erikson's concept of identity, he developed the concept of large group identity, meaning that thousands, even millions of people that have no chance ever to meet in person feel connected on deep unconscious levels in a similar psychic construction. Usually more or less invisible, but activated under stress. The concepts of chosen glory, chosen trauma in connection with that time collapse are very powerful in this context. I cannot spell out all the details here. I think it's also not necessary. Many of you will know, and if not, please, if interested, read his books. It really is valuable. One of the more recent ones I had the honor to co-edit. But what's fascinating about Professor Volkan's work is his connection to practical politics. It just already was mentioned by Paul, that when Anwar al-Sadat in 1977, in his speech in the Knesset, the Israeli parliament, said that he considers the problems between Israelis and Arabs being to 70% psychological problems. That was a moment for Professor Volkan to start a project. He had the possibility then to explore and then to, in a way, to treat the psychological challenges. He developed for treatment, he developed the tree model. The tree model is just a wonderful picture for the process of often year-long process of how to develop, how to build up these dialogues, negotiations, and so on. The tree model is an image, the tree, that there are roots of the tree. That means before you start any negotiations, any dialogue between conflicting parties, please inform yourself as much as you can and use every source for information. That of course are books, that are statistics, it's everything, but don't forget the taxi driver. They usually have the best expression for the feelings that are around in the place which is concerned. So every information you get, you have if you're lucky, you have a multidisciplinary team, because not only with one discipline you can get the full picture. Then if you have done that, bring together a group of people with some influence. Not the political leaders who are in the first line, because they have to act and they are under full vision of the public and have to always to try to be re-elected, but bring together a group of people with some influence so that they can study themselves and the psychological problems that blocks them to find adequate solutions for the problems at stake. That's a complicated process, and Professor Volkan has written much about the difficulties and tricks and traps on the way of dialogue. But hopefully this group meeting regularly over longer time are arriving somewhere, and then the institution building can begin, hopefully, to find good solutions for the people who are living in the area. This model was developed and executed in the context of the Oslo Agreement and later after the decline of the Soviet Union in Estonia. And of course also in other places, but these are the most prominent ones. And there's so much more. Professor Volkan is not just a historical person, what you might think when you get a lifetime award. He is still working, giving lectures, writing and editing books. The latest one just came out. It's Psychoanalysis in the Holy Land. So you will all understand that this is very timely at the moment to understand. It's a moment where it really looks that nobody can, from the different sides, can speak with the other side anymore. So just to bring out a book like that. In 2007, he founded the International Dialogue Initiative, bringing together a multidisciplinary network of people. Its mission is to bring psychoanalytical, psychological knowledge and understanding to societal conflicts. And that is where I came in. So.
Thank you, Regine. Thank you, everybody. Also, let me thank 3 more people. One of them I never saw, the other 2 I saw. They are Anwar Sadat, Mikhail Gorbachev, and Jimmy Carter. I was, as Regine told you, I was born in Cyprus. My neighbors were Greek Cypriots, Armenian Cypriots, and so on. And then ethnic conflicts started. I went to medical school in Turkey. And after I finished my medical studies, I could not get money in Turkey because I was a British citizen. And there was a thing called brain drain to America. They did not have enough physicians, so I came to America. Soon after that, I heard that my roommate, who was like my brother, I did not have a brother, I had only 2 sisters. He was killed by a terrorist in Cyprus. And here I was in America all alone. I did not know what to do, how to breathe. And I studied psychiatry, and then in North Carolina, and I went to Cherry Hospital to work. And this was, my goodness, just like yesterday, beginning of 1960. Cherry Hospital was only for African Americans. And I learned what is racism. And because I could not grieve of leaving my country, my death of my roommate, I began studying mourning. And then Sadat's going to Jerusalem in 1977 changed my life because he mentioned that 70% of the problem between Arabs and Israelis was a psychological wall. And I was a member of American Psychiatric Association's Psychiatry and Foreign Affairs, which meant we met every 6 months, had bourbon, joked, and went home. And Sadat's visit changed this committee's work. I've become its president, and I had the Greek American to be my vice president. And we went to Israel, we went to Egypt to study what's going on. And we brought high-level Israelis and high-level Arabs together because at that time, American government was supporting such a study. But since we were psychoanalysts, we never mentioned this in newspapers and so on. We did everything just ourselves, but we brought General Shlomo Gazit from Israel. We brought Taksin Bashir, Ambassador Taksin Bashir, Anwar Sadat's best friend, together for 6 years. Once or twice a year, we got these Israelis and Arabs, Egyptians and Palestinians get together. And one time, a Palestinian psychiatrist, he was a young psychiatrist, was sitting next to Shlomo Gazit, General Shlomo Gazit. And he said to the general, you have been a very, very good commander of Gaza. And after that, Israelis sent other people, and they were not as good as you were. You were honest. But he was putting his hand in his pocket, and I, as a psychoanalyst, I thought that sitting next to an Israeli general induced in him some concentration anxiety, and he was touching himself to be sure that he was not castrated. It turned out that he was touching a little stone. The stone had Palestinian colors, black colors. I learned that at that time in Palestine, Palestinians, many Palestinians had this stone in their pockets when they went outside. And whenever they felt anxious, like seeing an Israeli soldier or something, they would touch this little stone. And this is how I became interested in what is called large group psychology. And later on, when Gorbachev came to power, he was able to send 5 of his psychologists to America to a meeting. And I talked with them. And next thing I know, my group of Americans and a group of Soviets, we began having meetings, learned that they were all Gorbachev people, and Gorbachev was following what we were saying about psychology. And after the Soviet Empire collapsed, we spent 7 years in Baltic republics so that there would be no deadly responses. I spent 5 years in the Republic of Georgia. Then Yugoslavia collapsed, and my group and I spent so much time so that there would be no deadly things. Then I worked in other places, and last one was Kuwait after invasion of Saddam Hussein, etc., etc. And I wrote all these things in my books, and I'm came up with many concepts describing psychohistory. And I thank you for thinking of me and giving me this wonderful medal, and also meeting some of the people I know. Very nice. And again, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. Great to see faces both familiar and new. And I'm thrilled to introduce one of my favorite people in the world, Professor George Atwood. So I first met George Atwood years ago. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was a freshman at Rutgers University, eager to take a course that I felt would help me make sense of my loosening grip on reality. That course was abnormal psychology, and it was taught by George. Imagine my surprise upon walking in that the Scott Hall Auditorium was packed with over 400 students at 8:10 in the morning, no less, with a similar number of students coming in for the 9:50 a.m. section right after. Imagine also my surprise that we would be learning about the life worlds of people in the grip of madness, as opposed to diagnostic categories and symptom checklists. Over the weeks and months of the semester, George told us stories, at times funny, at times heartbreaking, many of them drawn from his practice. Stories of radical invalidation and obliterating trauma, stories of self-loss and world loss, stories that are unhearable and unsayable, and stories of compassion and empathy, giving way to reconstitution and renewal. Atwood's fall abnormal psychology class and personality psychology, offered during the spring, also at 8:10 in the morning, had come to be known as story time among Rutgers undergraduates. The line to speak with George after class and during office hours was long, but he made time for each student who felt listened to and comforted by his presence. Many of them felt inspired to follow in his footsteps, dedicating themselves to the study of the human condition in all its complexity and depth. I was one of those students fortunate enough to work closely with George. George and I bonded over our shared interest in the relationship between creative genius and madness. He graciously agreed to supervise my thesis on creativity and suicide at a time when I was navigating the razor-thin line between my own creativity and suicidality. In that time, and in the years since, I read anything and everything written by George that I could get my hands on, from single author works like The Abyss of Madness, which contains detailed case studies of people in crisis, to co-authored books like Worlds of Experience, Structures of Subjectivity, The Power of Phenomenology, and Contexts of Being. I was, and I continue to be, astonished that someone so accomplished and prolific can be so funny and down to earth. His assertion that, and I quote, behaviorism is a doctrine that flies up its own asshole, will forever be remembered by his students. Among Atwood's writings, Faces in a Cloud, Intersubjectivity and Personality Theory remains a classic and a favorite. Co-authored with Robert Stolorow and originally published in 1979, Faces in a Cloud opens with this premise. Personality theorists are not transcendent beings who view the world from a standpoint of unconditioned objectivity. They are circumscribed by their subjectivity. The book thus turns the viewfinder on the observer, subjecting the theorist to psychological analysis, and in the process, illuminating the subjective origins of personality theory. Through in-depth psychobiographical case studies, Faces in a Cloud explores the themes and leitmotifs in the lives of four thinkers: Sigmund Freud, Carl Gustav Jung, Wilhelm Reich, and Otto Rank. See, for example, theoretical constructs that stem from an urgent need to sustain or repair tenuous worlds of experience. We also see theories that arise from a need to safeguard images of emotionally significant others. Ultimately, this beautiful book teaches us that the investigator is inseparable from the world he or she investigates, and that self-experience is embedded in a nexus of human relations, which in turn are historically and subjectively molded. Faces in a Cloud is a profound contribution to personality theory and the psychology of knowledge. The theme of the observer becoming the observed recurs in many of Atwood's and Stolorow's subsequent forays. These include thought-provoking case studies of major philosophers like Soren Kierkegaard, Friedrich Nietzsche, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and Martin Heidegger. In these philosophers' post-Cartesian thinking and writing, one finds attempts to concretize and reunify personal psychological worlds that have been fractured by traumatic loss. The theme also recurs in Atwood's psychobiographical studies of artists. I am thinking in particular of his beautiful study of Johann Sebastian Bach's life and music. As George powerfully illustrates, Bach's soul was split between the passionate love of life and an equally passionate love for those he had lost, which Bach sought to integrate through his simultaneously lively and mournful music. Atwood is a magician who brings his subjects to life with his beautiful writing. His scholarly writings are themselves creative works of the highest order. They teach us to begin a dialogue with what seems to us strange. They show us that experiences, no matter how bizarre on the surface, become humanly intelligible when understood in their own subjective terms. And they beckon us to see the possibility for breakthroughs and breakdowns, to find meaning in our individual and collective vulnerabilities. George has received many accolades for his groundbreaking scholarship, teaching, and service. To name but a few of these accolades, He is an honorary member of the American Psychoanalytic Association. He is a founding member at the Institute for the Psychoanalytic Study of Subjectivity. He has received the Lindback Award for his distinguished teaching at Rutgers University, and he has won a Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Society for the Psychological Treatment of Schizophrenia and Other Psychoses. These awards represent a mere sliver of the depth and breadth of Atwood's contributions to humanity and the lives he has changed directly and indirectly. In the 21 years I have known him, George has been unfailing in his encouragement of my creative and scholarly pursuits, and in urging me to keep on keeping on. His scholarship, mentorship, and friendship have been life-saving. And this world would be a much better place if we could make multiple clones of George Atwood. I am proud to call George a teacher, a mentor, a friend, a muse, and an esteemed colleague. And so it is my honor to introduce Professor George Atwood, who is so richly deserving of the Lifetime Achievement Award for extraordinary accomplishment in psychohistory. Keep on keeping on, brother.
I don't have any kind of prepared text to work from, just a collection of thoughts on this occasion of having received this award. I should start by saying that my good friend, beloved friend and colleague and everything, Donna Orange, was killed in a traffic mishap a couple of days ago. And I'm in a grief state because I miss her terribly, and she should be here, possibly receiving her share of this prize that I'm getting today. And it's hard for me to talk about without bursting into tears, because she has been such a close friend and colleague, and it's heartbreaking to see this happen. I've had a lot of deaths recently, and I feel it's a dangerous thing to become close to me because you have a tendency to die. So anyway, so that said, I asked myself, what would be good to talk about in a brief little interval of time here, and didn't come up with much, but except for one thing. A project I'm engaged in right now, which is a study of creative genius and its relation to madness. In particular, I've devoted many years to studying four of the great geniuses of Western civilization: Leonardo da Vinci, Friedrich Nietzsche, I'm upset. Talking about Donna Orange getting killed in an accident is myself. Johann Sebastian Bach, Friedrich Nietzsche, William Shakespeare, the work on Bach and Nietzsche is pretty much complete, and they're published in separate essays that appear in various volumes. If you're interested in looking at them, you could find them immediately on Google, just typing in my name, Atwood, Bach, Atwood, Nietzsche. The papers will appear miraculously. I haven't written anything about William Shakespeare, but I've been studying and thinking about him for a number of years. And on Leonardo da Vinci, I realized as I was planning the remarks I would have here, that I've been studying him for close to 65 years. My first acquaintance with him was when I was 17 years old, and spent some time in Europe. And one part of the visit was a trip to Paris, France. And I was with a very close friend of mine, and we shared the experience. But he had to leave suddenly because his girlfriend sent him a Dear John letter. Never wanted to see him again. So he hopped a plane came back to the United States, leaving me alone in Paris for 10 days. And I wasn't sure what to do with myself. So I thought, well, I'll go see the Eiffel Tower, and then I'm going to go see the Louvre and check out what the fuss is all about with Leonardo da Vinci. So I did that. And I found myself coming back, well, a second time to the Louvre, looking at the Leonardo, because the experience of encountering his painting Mona Lisa was just completely mind-blowing to me. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have high expectations. I just knew that there's a lot of fuss about this artist. But when I walked in on the painting, at first it was very small. I was surprised at how little it was. I'd seen so many reproductions of it, much bigger than the actual original. But as I stood there in the immense lines, millions of people come to visit and look at that. It's the most famous and the most precious painting in the whole world. I found myself being drawn into the painting. It acquired a three-dimensionality of having depth. You don't feel like looking at it, if you let it affect you, you don't feel like you're looking at a flat surface. You feel drawn into a world. Also, many people have commented, and I can repeat their comment, that when the viewer moves around from side to side in looking at the Mona Lisa, her eyes follow you. How Leonardo managed to achieve that effect, I've never understood, but it's extremely striking. Also, another feature is that if you look at her and you focus on various parts of her face, her forehead, her mouth, what one side of her head, the smile seems to come and go. Sometimes she's smiling and sometimes she's not. So one has the sense of being in the presence of a living being. And then a final impression that I had that was just incredibly powerful to me. I felt she saw me and was looking at me and understood me. How that could be possible, I don't know. How can one be understood and appreciated by something that's in a painting? But that was the experience of it all. I'm getting upset again because I'm thinking about the death of Donna Orange. I can't talk about that without breaking up. So it's good that I just say that rather than try to suppress the feelings I'm having. Let me look at my note. I tried to understand who is the Mona Lisa to Leonardo? We know this, that he had intended to sell the painting and even made an agreement with a merchant to buy it, but he never gave it up and kept it with him till he died. It was priceless to him and not to be let go of. What did he see in the Mona Lisa that he was so attached to? And as I thought about this, a popular song came into my mind, which I've not been able to get rid of. The Mother and Child Reunion is the song. I wish I had a good singing voice. I would sing it for you. But you should do it and apply it to the Mona Lisa. I think he saw in his painting a beautiful woman and a reflection of his own mother. And that I see the loss of the mother being the central trauma of Leonardo's life. It took place when he was about 1.5 years old. The details don't matter. Just that there was an early maternal bond, which had supreme importance. It was very, very early. And it came to an end as he moved to live with his father, and a father had married someone someone else. Leonardo never was not legally his to belong. I'm having the same reaction as before about the upset. One thing about the Mona Lisa is that the painting shows bodies of water up to the right and to the left of Mona Lisa, and it looks as if the one body of water is much higher than on one side than on the other, and a number of commentators have wondered whether this was Leonardo's way of picturing an impending flood about to happen. In his notebooks, he recorded forecasts of the end of the world, which he thought would take place in an apocalyptic flooding. As I thought about such images and anticipations of catastrophe, I thought of a famous article by my beloved theorist, Donald Winnicott, who talked about how a fear of disaster in the future is a memory of catastrophes, emotional catastrophes that have taken place long ago. I venture the hypothesis that the image of an apocalyptic flooding was a memory of an emotionally disastrous rupture in the early relationship that he had with his mother. I'm not going to dwell on that any further, but this is something that I've come to and think is an important dimension in appreciating what that painting is all about. I've thought about why do I see it that way? Why do I jump on the idea that the loss of the mother is the main theme operating in his life and in his art? And it occurs to me that my own personality was shaped extraordinarily deeply by the death of my mother when I was a boy. You know, some people might criticize the interpretations that I've made. Say, George, you're projecting your own experience of loss onto Leonardo. I certainly had the experience of loss, and it's undoubtedly a factor in sensitizing me that existed in his life and in his art. But the fact that rather than it being a projection, the effect of this experience in my life on my interpretation of Leonardo can be understood as a sensitizing of me to that possible dimension of experience.
I'm honored to be here with you all today. So as you all probably know, Bob Stolorow often starts his works with an epigraph. So I think it'd be a great disservice to break that tradition today. So I too will begin in the same way. The epigraph for this introduction is, to our friend, our colleague, Bob, is taken from Nietzsche's Daybreak. It's entitled Our Teachers. In our youth, we take our teachers and guides from the time in which we happen to live and the circle in which we happen to move. We're thoughtlessly confident that the times we live in are bound to have teachers better suited to us than to anyone else, and that we're bound to find them without much trouble. For this childishness, we have, in later years, to pay a heavy price. We have to expiate our teachers and ourselves. We then perhaps go in search of our true guides throughout the world, the world of the past included. But perhaps it's too late. And in the worst case scenario, we discover that we were living when they were young and that we missed them. I feel incredibly fortunate then to have been given the opportunity to know and to learn from one of the finest theorists I've ever come across. I feel doubly lucky then to have been set the almost impossible task of introducing Bob Stolorow on the occasion of his Lifetime Achievement Award for extraordinary accomplishments in psychohistory. Extraordinary is a good word. There is indeed much in Stolorow's work that's outside the normal course of events, much that is, in a word, exceptional. You can see it in his marvelous collaboration with George Atwood, in their intellectual comradeship, in their brotherhood in darkness, to make use of their description. You can see it reflected in their works, from the very first collaboration, Faces in a Cloud, Intersubjectivity in Personality Theory, to their latest, The Power of Phenomenology, Psychoanalytic and Philosophical Perspectives. You can see it in Stolorow's intellectual career that spans disciplines, collaborators such as Bernard Brandschaft, Frank Lockman, and Donna Orange, and has yielded 13 books and upwards of 250 articles, which is evidence of a remarkable feat, an envy to most academics who struggle to write but a book a decade. Just as remarkable, of course, are the insights contained therein. From Faces in a Cloud, we learn through the case studies of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Wilhelm Reich, and Otto Rank that psychoanalytic theory is, in large part, the expression of the subjective world of its creator. If this is so, then what's needed and what's called for is a theory of subjectivity. Such a theory seeks to give an account of how emotional worlds come to be structured. How, that is, do our affective economies come to be? Why is it that certain emotional experiences are permitted expression, while others must be painfully concealed, perhaps even somatized? Why are some affects integrated into personality and others not? The answers given form the very tenets of phenomenological contextualism, Stolorow's theory of subjectivity. Our emotional experiences always take form within constitutive, relational, or intersubjective contexts. It is these contexts that produce relational expectations, our emotional cognitive schemata, our pre-reflective organizing principles. These templates are the very building blocks of personality, of character, and of subjectivity, as they shape, either open or foreclose, experiences of the world. Herein, then, a new picture of psychoanalysis emerges. Instead of, as Stolorow writes, picturing ourselves as psychoanalytic master builders, blueprinting architectonic realignments, or constructing foundations for new psychic edifices. Within the metapsychology-free framework which I am proposing, we must rest content with merely trying to comprehend and change the structures of our patients' subjective experiences. It is here, as far as I can see, that psychoanalytic theory is forever moved from mind to world, from mental contents to relational contexts, from intrapsychic conflicts to intersubjective conditions, from drives to affects, from tyrannical essentialism to phenomenological contextualism. Let me turn now to another of Stolorow's great themes, a subject matter with which psychoanalysts rightly, I think, have grappled from the start: emotional trauma. Why do some patients, Joseph Breuer and Sigmund Freud asked, develop physical symptoms that do not have physical causes, while others do not? One answer offered early on by Freud in that studies on hysteria was that the answer had to do with the patient's experience that was uniformly frightful, highly emotional, an unbearable or overwhelming affective state, and the content of that experience, which was so distressing for the patient that it needed repudiating. By contrast, and ever attentive to context, trauma, on Stolorow's view, is not the result of emotional pain itself. Pain, Stolorow writes, is not pathology, or the content of that experience, but the relational setting in which it occurs and is experienced. Painful emotional experiences, Stolorow writes, subjective context within which they can be held and integrated. Unbearable affective states on this view are in search of a relational home, a place of deep emotional understanding within which devastating pain can be held. Thus, how clinicians dwell or otherwise inhabit this space matters, for it opens up possibility. Unbearable pain can be rendered more tolerable, even integrated. Reading Stolorow's work compels us to assess whether, and this is a quote, the language that one uses to address another's experience of emotional trauma meets the trauma head-on, articulating the unbearable and unendurable, saying the unsayable, unmitigated by any efforts to soothe, comfort, encourage, reassure. Such efforts invariably being experienced by the turning away from his or her traumatized states. It's a wonderful line. It's a characteristic one too. Here we see Stolorow ripping away the gimmicks of sentimentality and of nostalgia, eschewing coercive platitudes, let it go, and time heals all wounds, that brush painful affects away. Instead of moving on, there can be a moving towards. Analytic spaces become arenas where patients can think and argue, to be sure, but also spaces where overwhelming, disorganizing, disruptive, and dangerous affect can be metabolized, even integrated. It's a space in which metaphysical illusion, our defense against trauma, can be acknowledged explicitly and maybe even challenged. Here, and by way of conclusion, is another terribly challenging and rightly sobering thought. It is the recognition, says Stolorow, that emotional trauma is built into the basic constitution of human existence, end quote. As Heidegger, an important figure for Stolorow, shows, and as the Nietzsche epigraph to this introduction alludes, we often attempt to evade terrible truths, one of which is our finitude, our temporal limitedness, and another of which is our thrownness, our historical situatedness. The idea that we'll get the teachers we need without much trouble covers up both truths, of course. I could have just as easily been haunted by, and if only, by that worst case scenario. It could have been otherwise. I could have found my guide, found Bob, too late. Realizing our vulnerability to chance, to situation, to time, and throwing some light on them is, to be clear, not nothing. Or, as Stolorow might put it, and to give him the last word, illuminating meanings, the meanings organizing one's experience, the meanings organizing the other's experience, and a dynamic intersubjective system constituted by these interacting worlds of meaning is a way to bring light into the darkness. So thanks very much. Congratulations, Bob.
Thank you so much, Allison, for a terrific introduction. Really, you get me, that's for sure. I want to echo George's grief about the loss of Donna Orange. Quite a terrible tragedy. I remember seeing photos of her riding a bicycle along the coastal highway in California, and it gave me chills seeing it because it's kind of a dangerous highway, as she so tragically discovered. And I want to thank Paul and Ina for organizing this wonderful event. The title of my presentation is Psychobiography and Emotional Phenomenology, a Generative Unity. And I begin with a quotation from Nietzsche, who based on this quotation could be seen as one of the founding fathers of psychobiography or psychohistory. Nietzsche wrote in Beyond Good and Evil, he wrote, "It has gradually become clear to me what every great philosophy has heretofore been, a confession on the part of its author and a kind of involuntary and unconscious memoir." What a great quotation. In this essay, I describe the generative unity formed by psychobiographical inquiry and emotional phenomenology. On one hand, the emotional themes pervading an author's life are brought to life by psychobiographical method. On the other hand, psychobiographical method illuminates how such emotional themes have shaped the author's work. In my first book with Atwood, Faces in a Cloud, Subjectivity and Personality Theory, that you already heard quite a bit about, we exemplified these principles through psychobiographical studies of the works and emotional lives of four major psychoanalytic theorists: Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Wilhelm Reich, and Otto Rank. Here I summarize our chapter on Jung, for whom the relationship between works and emotional themes is particularly vivid. The person that emerges in Jung's theorizing is profoundly, even ontologically, disunited. In his theoretical vision, quote, human nature bears the burden of a terrific and unending conflict, of a terrible and unending conflict between the principle of the ego, self-preservation through grandiose isolation, and the principle of instinct, union with the idealized other. In Jung's theoretical world, both of these strivings expose the person to the threat of self-disintegration through isolated self-inflation and through surrender to the idealized other. In the context of this unending conflict, the integrity of the personality is preserved through the principle of enantiodromia, quote, the regulated function of opposites. According to this principle, every tendency of the conscious ego is balanced by the development of an opposite tendency of equal strength in the unconscious psyche. Jung granted enantiodromia the status of a metaphysical principle protecting the viability and the vitality of psychological life. Quote, all energy can only proceed from the tension of opposites, unquote. The childhood evolution of Jung's subjective world is described in his autobiographical memoir. The structure of his world is captured vividly by contrasting figures. His daytime world was occupied by Jesus Christ, a wonderfully kind being toward whom one could feel entirely trusting and positive. His sinister nighttime world, by contrast, housed terrifying underground figures that were destructive and devouring. Jung's world came to be pictured as a polarized tension between above and below, omnipotent good and omnipotent evil. Corresponding to this tension, his self-image split between two separately personified components, which he called personality number one and personality number two. The duality that dominated his subsequent life. As a child, Jung sought relief from this tension in a series of secret games and solitary rituals. Jung's bifurcated childhood world was heir to a painfully unstable tie to his mother, similar to Da Vinci and George. During his early years, there were severe marital problems between his parents, and it became necessary for his mother to leave home and spend several months in a sanitarium. Jung experienced his mother's disappearing as a devastatingly traumatic abandonment, after which he felt deeply distrustful of being loved. His subsequent experience of her was sharply divided. During the daytime, he experienced her as warm, loving, and companionable. But at night, she acquired frightening and uncanny qualities. Jung's distant relationship with his father failed to provide a substitute for his lost tie to his mother. and his childhood was pervaded by a painful loneliness. The vulnerabilities in Jung's emotional life were nullified in his theory of the collective unconscious and its archetypes. The collective unconscious can be viewed as a means of robbing others of their threatening demoniacal qualities by relocating their obliterating power into the interior of the psyche. Furthermore, his claim that the collective unconscious is universal and transpersonal provided an antidote to his agonizing sense of aloneness. The study of Jung's life and work illustrates the generative unity of psychobiographical inquiry and emotional phenomenology. The emotional themes pervading his life are brought to light by psychobiographical method. And psychobiographical method illuminates how these emotional themes shaped his work. Thank you very much.